Hello, welcome in. My name is Sarah. I'm a mindset mastery coach, transformational hypnotherapist, and attachment style specialist. And I'm back today with another video for you guys. And I want to do an overview of all of the attachment styles. This is going to be really quick and condensed, but since I haven't talked too much about anxious ambivalent really at all yet on the channel, I really wanted to start including and incorporating that because a lot of my clients are anxiously attached. And also my disorganized clients have the tendency to either be avoidant or anxious. So it's really important that we understand all of the attachment styles, right? Because depending on our childhood and those experiences, and then depending on the experiences we had in each of our adult relationships, can really depend on how we're going to attach, either securely or insecurely. And then, of course, what insecure attachment style might play out. So if you'd like to book a personal session with me, I have a link below for a 20-minute free discovery call. Let's dive right in. So I'm going to start with anxious ambivalent because, again, I feel like I haven't given you guys enough love on this channel yet, so please forgive me, but I want to talk about it. And I really think that one of the reasons that I haven't is because the majority of attachers are anxiously attached, and also anxiously attached tend to have the most understanding of the attachment styles. So you guys have really done your work. You really tend to dive in and want the answers and want to do the self-help and the self-work to get better. So I kind of feel like I think and intuitively, like I need to give more understanding to the disorganized and avoidants who may tend to avoid the healing process. But I'm going to be making this as fair as possible so that my anxiously attached clients and people out there really get a deeper understanding of what's going on for them. So for the anxious ambivalent, there was a lot of intermittent reinforcement. Now, as I've mentioned, you can find this also with disorganized attachment, especially those that are leaning anxious. But for the anxious ambivalent, particularly in childhood, it's like they knew Eden and then they lost it. Okay, and then I'm going to talk about how that plays out for avoidant and disorganized as well as far as eating goes. But that's a really good example. Like they knew something that was really, really good, and then it was taken away from them, right? So you can imagine how that would make somebody anxious, how that would bring out that part of them, and make them feel like, I don't know when I'm going to get that pellet again. I don't know when I'm going to get that reward again, or that love again, or that affection or intimacy. So I'm going to cling. I'm going to hang on to it as much as possible. And I'm going to try to store it away, which really ultimately means that their attachment style is always on. Like where the avoidance attachment, or excuse me, attachment system is always on. The avoidance attachment system is pretty much almost always off, and the disorganized, it's on and off and on and off. It's a push and pull, come here, go away. But with the anxious attachment, it's almost always running. So you can imagine that these people, like my anxiously attached loves out there, you're running in fight or flight. It's absolutely exhausting. But most of the time you're like fighting for the relationship. In fact, you're usually fighting for the sake of both people because you're doing the job of both people. Because the most prevalent pairing out there is anxious and avoidant. Interesting, right? Because it's the most challenging. So both anxious and avoidant would do better to pair up with a secure attacher, but that doesn't usually happen. So the anxious ambivalent person says, when are my needs going to be met? Because they were met and then they're not. When are they going to be met again? Because they're sitting there in just agony, really, waiting to see when that ball is going to be dropped, right? When the other shoe is going to drop. And so that's why they cling. That's why they tend to complain. Like anxious ambivalents tend to complain more. And that's really because they don't feel like that cup is ever really full. They feel like it could be depleted at any time. And it's also that intermittent reinforcement that creates the complainer and the anxious ambivalent. Anxious ambivalence, you guys would do so much better, especially if you have avoidant partners, which a lot of you do, to instead of complain, which I was so guilty of in my own marriage because I didn't know any better, to just present it in a different way so that you're not pinging your avoidance attachment system. I mean, you want to ping it, you want it to be on, but in the right direction. If you're complaining, they're going to like shut you. They're not going to respond. They're going to shut down. My anxiously attached people, you are more feelers and less dealers. Whereas the avoidance out there, you are more dealers. Like you learn to deal with things and not feel. The anxious loves out there, you learn to feel. You are deep, deep feelers, just like my disorganized attachers out there. And again, like I said, your attachment system is almost always on all the time, in contrast to the avoidants who shut this down. And again, you knew Eden, you knew heaven, you knew that this beautiful connection that you may have had with your mom or your caretaker, and then you lost it. And then you got it, and then you lost it. And you got it, and then you lost it. And so you learned that love wasn't safe. You learned that love doesn't always stay around. So of course you're going to grasp when your partner goes away. Let's say your partner's going out of town, or they don't call you as often as you want them to call. It's sort of like my anxiously attached people. You're waiting for your partner to sort of prove to you that you're worthy, where you have to learn how to be inherently worthy. You are inherent. You don't have to learn that, but you have to learn that you are already inherently worthy within yourself, instead of seeking outside of self. Remember, the avoidant, who's probably your partner, is seeking inside for a sense of self, and they're afraid they're going to lose their sense of self getting involved in a relationship. And you tend to seek outside for your sense of self, outside for your security. So really, for your healing, it really involves understanding that you're already whole within yourself, and then that you have everything you need within yourself, and you don't have to rely on anything outside of you to provide for you. It's a lot of inner child work, and a lot of really practicing great self-care and self-love, and understanding that you can come back to a more secure attached system. Okay, my avoidance. I love you guys. My husband is an avoidant. I am a disorganized. I'm healing disorganized. So I tended to lean either anxious or avoidance, depending on the conversation, the situation, et cetera, and also depending on what my partner was doing. When you have two avoidants paired up, even if it's disorganized and dismissive avoidant, then when one's anxious, the other will be avoidant, and vice versa. Because what the power, it's like the power. Somebody has to be on top, somebody has to be here, and it will flip. And it will do this often inside of those relationships. My avoidance, you don't even know that you need anything. It's like, I think you have needs, but they're so buried and so suppressed and repressed from your childhood and what you were taught and what your experience was, that you had to learn to deal and not to feel. You were praised for your accomplishments, for your grades, for your sports. Like, you were praised for those things. You weren't praised for who you were. You were praised for the things that you did, not what you actually brought to the table. So you can imagine how this can create kind of like a shallow persona. You are not shallow, by the way, my avoidance. I love you. You are not shallow. You're so intelligent. It's just that, unfortunately, in your childhood with your parents or your caregivers, and that experience of, the ages of like 0 to 7 and even beyond, you were not shown that people could be loved for being who they were. So that's why you tend to be workaholics. You tend to seek out staying busy all the time, avoiding, dismissing, because that's what you learned really brought you a merit. And so, like, I'll give an example with my husband. He started his own business last year, and he wanted his dad to really recognize what he had done. And he felt like nobody in his life recognized it. In fact, he made it really hard for people to recognize his accomplishments, because he sort of, like, you would say, oh my God, that's amazing, and he would play it down. And then over time, he sort of trains people, right? Avoidance, you train people to sort of tone things down. You want that praise, but then you sort of don't accept it. Okay. And I wonder if any of you can relate. Please let me know in the comments below that this is making sense. I think it is for a lot of you. And sometimes my avoidance will, message me privately, and that's fine. But if you're feeling courageous and you want to message, again, I keep this a safe space. So I'm not going to let anybody bash avoidance or bash disorganized or bash anxious or any of us or secure. We're not going to do that on here. We're going to try to understand what's going on with love and compassion, because at the core, we are all human beings. And again, these are like, attachment system is more than just a label. Like, narcissist is a label. This is more than just a label. This is actually your nervous system. This is rooted in science. It's rooted in what's going on internally in our nervous systems during childhood, during those like formative years, that create these nervous system attachments or detachments. And so avoidance, I would really be curious to learn what you think about that, because it was really hard for me to do anything for him. They're like, I can do it myself. That's an avoidant. I'll do it myself. I can do it best. But then you sort of get upset because people in your life aren't doing things for you, but you're basically telling them or showing them you can do it yourself. So eventually you're sending the message out, and eventually people will just stop doing things or stop praising you altogether. So you never really knew Eden. You know how I mentioned the anxious attachers, they knew Eden and then it was taken away? Well, you never really knew Eden. And so it's like, how can you miss what you never had? And I think that's what a lot of my avoidance feel is, how can I miss what I never had? And also wanting something that's not going to be there, or not going to, yeah, really, that's not going to be there. Like, why would I do that to myself? It's futile for me to miss something that's not going to be there. It's futile for me to ask for something and ask for my needs to get met when I've learned that my needs are not important. This is so vital to understand. And I don't know why I'm so fascinated by avoidance. I think because I realize that I tend to be pretty avoidant myself in my past relationships. And I'm fascinated to learn why. It wasn't because I was trying to hurt people. It wasn't because, excuse me, I have hair on my lip. It wasn't because I was trying to ruin people's lives. It was because I was totally unaware of my attachment system. I was totally unaware that I was insecurely attached. I knew that I was hurting, but I didn't know why. And for avoidance, it's easier. Instead of feeling, you just deal. You just like push people away and you deal. And you're like, I can do it myself. Don't even bother. You're not going to be there anyway, because what you learned is that your needs weren't important, sadly, in childhood. Let's move on. Again, this is a very condensed version, guys, but let's move on to disorganized, AKA what's now being called fearful avoidant. But you can really see the disorganization play out if you spend time with a fearful avoidant, if you love a fearful avoidant, if you have a family member or a friend who's a fearful avoidant, you'll really see this play out in real time. Now, my disorganized, you have two conflicting impulses: go towards and get the hell out of there. Okay, like there's no happy medium. It's like black or white. There is no gray area. Disorganized, there isn't. It is a spectrum, but you definitely tend to go either anxious or avoidant. There really isn't somewhere in the middle. Although sometimes this can be said for all the insecure attachment styles, you will go towards secure, and that will happen. But I'm talking about when your attachment system is pinged, meaning like somebody said something, you've been triggered, you've been pinged, then you will move anxious or avoidant. You're not really going to be in the middle. You might move back and forth in a conversation many times, or you might move back and forth like in a day or in a week or in a relationship many times back and forth, but you're going to typically assume one or the other. You had a lot of chaos or threat in your childhood. Now, this maybe wasn't necessarily physical threat. It could have been emotional neglect, emotional abandonment. You could have had parents that were addicts, like active addicts playing out. And you might not have even realized that they were addicted, right? Unless you really had, I don't know, really keen awareness or knew about addiction, or maybe you had your own as you were growing up as a teenager. But typically, we sort of see our parents as perfect. And until, for some of us, even our 20s, it's like you had this aha moment of going, oh my God, my parents are people. And then you can start to really do the really kind of painful work of realizing that your parents had flaws, that they did their best, but that they inevitably, failed you in many ways and failed to meet your emotional needs. So your emotional needs were not met, just like anxious and avoidant. So as a child, you can see disorganized children, like this disorganized attachers, kind of physically like moving around in circles, not knowing what to do. They are literally torn one way or the other. They're just like, well, I want to go towards my parent and caretaker, but then they've scared me, or they've taught me that I can't rely on them. So emotional neglect can have profound consequences and profound lasting effects on a child. Think about that. Like, the law doesn't even recognize emotional abuse or emotional neglect or abandonment as a thing yet, which is crazy in 2025, but it is a thing. When you're emotionally neglected, you tend to develop unworthiness, like a deep sense of unworthiness within yourself. Like, I am unworthy. You will see disorganized, just really low self-esteem. Also, with avoidance, even though they come off as having like thinking they're better than now, because they don't feel as deeply. So feelings can be kind of like annoying to them. But you will definitely see this with disorganized, just this feeling of like I am not worthy. I'm not worthy of love. I'm not worthy. And so you'll see them pick, people that are sort of like, honestly, people that are also unavailable, and people that are, I don't want to say beneath them, that sounds terrible, but people that aren't of their caliber, because they know they won't get rejected if they go that route. This is what a disorganized child or person might think. It's not long before you're going to become scary or unavailable to me. Like, if the child could talk, it's not long before that's going to happen again. And that's very scary. And it's very disorganizing to live in that chaos, to live in that conflict internally. So, if you ask my husband, like, well, how did this play out in your marriage with Sarah? I'm sure he would say, oh my God, she was so confusing. I did not understand her. I'll never understand her, because in the one moment she could be, crying, and the next moment she'd be angry. And it's just very confusing to live inside of your own disorganized attachment system. The other thing with disorganized is they might say something like, or feel something like, my life depends on being connected to you. But then there's this internal struggle and conflict, which also says, this is not good, get me out of here. So, like, my life depends on you, really, because as children, our life does depend on our parents feeding us and taking care of us and bathing us and, clothing us, putting a roof over our head. So we are dependent on them. But then also that parent or parental figure was scary or was not reliable. So it's like, wait a minute, no, I can't rely on you. Let me just, and then you can see how that would make a child anxious or avoidant, sometimes just within a day or within a conversation. So this was just a brief kind of synopsis of the attachment styles. I hope that this has clarified some things for you guys out there. If you wouldn't mind just dropping a like, share, subscribe, and a comment. These things greatly help the channel, and they just help people like you who really need to find my work and be able to benefit from my videos. Thank you so very much, guys, and I hope you have a beautiful day. It's a beautiful day here, and take good care, and I'll see you in the next one.